One night
I
in
don't know what to do.
1969, the phone rang at James Burton's home in Los Angeles. He picked it up. The voice on the other end said, "Man, I watched you on the Ozzie and Harriet show. You playing guitar, and Ricky singing. I watch that every week." It was Elvis Presley. James Burton was already one of the most respected session guitarists in America. He had played the famous lick on Susie Q when he was 17. He had backed Ricky Nelson through the entire run of hit records. He had recorded with Frank Sinatra, with Merle Haggard, with the best in the business. He had turned down a tour with Bob Dylan because he was too busy. He was not a man who was easily impressed by a phone call. But this was Elvis Presley telling him that the king of rock and roll had been watching him play guitar on television every single week. Burton later said, "I thought, wow, the king of rock and roll is watching me on TV. But it was cool, you know." They talked for 3 hours. By the end of that phone call, James Burton had agreed to do something that would define the rest of his life. He agreed to build a band and stand on a stage beside Elvis Presley for a comeback nobody was sure would work. He could not have known, on that night in 1969, that he was agreeing to be a witness, that he would stand 10 feet from Elvis Presley for the next 8 years, that he would see the triumph and the decline and the very last note, that he and one other man would be the only two musicians who never missed a single show from the first night to the last. This is the story of Elvis Presley, told by the man who had the best seat in the house and never once looked away. The 1969 call was not the first time Elvis had reached out to James Burton. It was the second. The first time was in 1968. Elvis and his management called James Burton to play on the television special that would become the legendary '68 comeback special. The black leather, the small stage, the return of everything Elvis had been. It was one of the most important projects of Elvis's career. James Burton turned it down. He was not being difficult. He was booked. He was in the studio recording an album with Frank Sinatra, produced by Jimmy Boyd. And James Burton lived by a simple professional rule. When you're booked, you're booked. He could not walk out on Sinatra to take another job, no matter whose job it was. But word got out in the industry, and the word was distorted. The story that spread was that James Burton had turned down Elvis Presley for Frank Sinatra, as if he had chosen one king over another, as if it were a snub. Burton knew that was not how it worked, and, crucially, so did Elvis. Elvis understood the professional code. He understood that a booked musician is a booked musician. He did not take it as an insult. He waited. A year later, in 1969, when Elvis was assembling the band for his return to live performance in Las Vegas, he called James Burton again, and this time, James Burton was available. That detail matters because it tells you something about who Elvis Presley was when the cameras were off. He did not hold the 1968 turndown against Burton. He did not let a distorted industry rumor decide who he wanted beside him. He knew what he wanted. He wanted the guitarist he had been watching on television for years, and he was patient enough to wait a year to get him. Once James Burton said yes, the work began, and the scale of it was staggering. Burton did not just play in the band, he built it. He was the one who assembled the group that would become known as the TCB Band, taking care of business. He recruited bassist Jerry Scheff, who did not even want the job at first, but went to the audition and was, in his own words, blown away by Elvis. He brought in drummer Ronnie Tutt. He worked with pianist Larry Muhoberac. Rhythm guitarist John Wilkinson had already agreed to come aboard. And then they had to learn Elvis's entire musical life. James Burton remembered it with a specific number. He said, "Right off the bat, we probably learned 150 songs over 6 nights of work. 150 songs in 6 nights. Think about what that means. Elvis Presley had a catalog that spanned rockabilly, gospel, ballads, blues, pop, and everything in between. More than a decade of recordings. And the band had to be ready to play any of it, in any order, because Elvis liked to be spontaneous on stage. He might call an audible. He might decide in the moment to sing something they had not rehearsed that day. The band had to be ready for all of it. Burton later said that this was exactly what kept the music alive. Elvis figured that playing in so many different styles kept him fresh and kept the shows exciting. And James Burton, the #1 session guitarist in the business precisely because of his range across every style of American music, was the perfect man to make that possible. 6 nights, 150 songs. And then they walked onto the stage of the International Hotel in Las Vegas, and Elvis Presley performed live for the first time in 8 years. There was a moment that happened at Elvis Presley concerts, night after night, for 8 years, that told you everything about how Elvis felt about James Burton. In the middle of a song, Elvis would step back from the microphone, point across the stage at his guitarist, and say 2 words, "Play it, James." And then he would give James Burton the stage. For a few bars, the biggest star in the world would step aside and let the audience watch his guitar player. Elvis introduced Burton at his shows, night after night, as his favorite guitar player. Not just a member of the band, his favorite. He said it publicly, from the stage, in front of thousands of people, over and over across 8 years. On the song "The Wonder of You," you can watch it happen. Elvis reaches the guitar solo and says, "Play the song, James," and points across the stage, handing him the moment. It is a small gesture. It takes 2 seconds, but it is Elvis Presley, the most famous performer alive, choosing, every single night, to share his spotlight with the man beside him. In 1969, Fender built James Burton's guitar. It was a Telecaster finished in a pink paisley pattern, and it became one of the most famous guitars in the history of rock and roll. When you picture the TCB band on that Las Vegas stage, it is often James Burton's pink paisley Telecaster that you see first. But the guitar was not what made Burton essential. What made him essential was the trust. Elvis knew that whatever he reached for on stage, whatever song, whatever key, whatever sudden change of direction, James Burton would be right there to catch it. For a performer who improvised constantly, that reliability was everything. "Play it, James." 2 words, 8 years, every night. Standing 10 feet from Elvis Presley for 8 years, James Burton saw things that the audience, out in the dark beyond the stage lights, could not see. He saw the mechanics of how Elvis actually worked on stage. In the Las Vegas years, small monitors were placed around the stage where only Elvis could see them, displaying lyrics to the songs. Elvis got very good at glancing at them without the audience ever noticing. Burton, standing right there, saw all of it, the small human systems that kept the superhuman performance running. He saw Elvis at his best. Burton said that when Elvis was truly connected to a song, there was nothing else like it. He had spent his career reading performers on stage, learning to sense when a singer was reaching for something and when they had found it. And he learned to read Elvis better than almost anyone. He knew when Elvis was working and when Elvis was somewhere else entirely, lost inside the song in a way that no technique could manufacture. And in the last years, he saw the decline. The band that stood on stage with Elvis in the mid-70s watched the change that the elaborate jumpsuits and the spectacle could partly disguise from the crowd, but could not disguise from the men standing 10 feet away. Burton was a professional. He kept playing, night after night. Whatever condition Elvis was in when he walked onto that stage, James Burton was there to hold the music together underneath him. That was the job, not just to play brilliantly, though he did that every night. The job was to be the steady thing, to be the man Elvis could point to and say, "Play it, James," and know that the ground would be solid. Through the triumph and through the decline, across 8 years and hundreds of shows, James Burton was the steady thing. And then came the summer of 1977. On June 26, 1977, at Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, Indiana, Elvis Presley performed his final concert. James Burton was on stage, exactly where he had been for 8 years. Pink paisley Telecaster in his hands, 10 feet from Elvis. Nobody knew it was the last one. That is the thing about last times. You almost never know you are living one while it happens. James Burton had played hundreds of shows beside Elvis. This one began like the others. The band took their places. Elvis came out. They played the songs they had played so many times that the music lived in their hands without thought. Burton had learned, Over 8 years to read Elvis on that stage, to know what he was reaching for, when he was connected, and when he was working. He had described watching Elvis on certain nights find a place inside a song where he was no longer performing at all, where he was simply somewhere else, and sounding, in Burton's words, more like himself than ever. 7 weeks after that final concert in Indianapolis, on August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley died at Graceland. He was 42 years old. James Burton had been beside him from the first night of the comeback to the last note of the last show. He and John Wilkinson, the rhythm guitarist, held a record that no one else in the band could claim. From 1969 to 1977, across all of it, they never missed a single performance, not one. Think about what that means. Every triumph, every ordinary Tuesday night show, every performance in the difficult final years, James Burton was there for all of it. He did not look away. He did not miss a night. He stood in his spot, 10 feet from Elvis, and did his job, which was to be the steady thing, until there were no more nights left. James Burton did not stop when Elvis died. He went on to a career that any musician would envy. He played with Emmylou Harris, with Elvis Costello, with John Denver, with Roy Orbison. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He has spent the decades since 1977 as one of the most respected guitarists alive. But wherever he goes, whatever stage he plays, he carries the 8 years. He gives interviews about them. He talks about the 3-hour phone call, the 150 songs, the pink Paisley guitar, the man who watched him on television and then made him his favorite guitar player in front of the whole world. There is something worth understanding about a witness like James Burton. Elvis Presley was surrounded, for most of his career, by people whose lives depended on him, managers, handlers, an entourage. Their memories of him are tangled up with their own interests. But James Burton was a working musician who was already successful before Elvis called and stayed successful long after Elvis was gone. He did not need Elvis. He chose him. And that gives his testimony a particular weight. What he testifies to, across all those interviews and all those decades, is not the tragedy. It is the music. It is the man who said, "Play it, James," and gave away his spotlight every night. It is the performer who, on his best nights, disappeared into a song and became more himself than the king of rock and roll ever let himself be in public. James Burton had the best seat in the house for the second half of Elvis Presley's life, 10 feet away, pink Paisley Telecaster, every single night. And when Elvis pointed across that stage and said those 2 words, "Play it, James," he was doing something he did for almost no one else. He was stepping back, in front of the whole world, and trusting the man beside him to carry the moment. For 8 years, James Burton never once dropped it. If a story like this is why you're here, the people who stood just outside the spotlight and saw the truth of it, subscribe. The next one is already being researched. And if you've ever been the steady thing in someone else's life, the person who held the ground so someone else could shine, tell us about it below. We read every one.